Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video, and today we have the RealSteel E801 Megalodon, and that is differentiated from just the Megalodon in the fact that this is a G10 liner lock with 14C28N steel rather than the titanium frame lock with M390. So I'm going to pull this one out. I'll bring it back in for a moment or a little while later for comparisons, but this is the knife we're focusing on, and I am going to do two separate reviews on these. I toyed with doing them together, but really they're quite different. And of course, you know, a lot of people who are interested in a fairly budget-friendly flipper in 14C28N, you know, they're not going to be maybe that interested in the, you know, $200 titanium version of this, okay? Now there may be some, and for you, you'll get the other review coming up here in the next few weeks. But for this one, I'm going to kind of treat it as a standalone review, other than to point out that it is based on the Megalodon design, and that design comes from the Carson Tech Labs boiling flipper that was introduced a few years ago. I'm not sure how the relationship between Carson Tech Labs and RealSteel works, or if there is one, or if they got whatever. I'm not even worried about that. We're worried about this G10 version of the Megalodon flipper, and it is a very nice knife. Now let me, before I get into the specifics of this knife, say that I have got to give a lot of credit to RealSteel. They have been doing a great job. They're coming out with models that are both useful and different and interesting, but not only that, they're well made and they're decent materials for their price point. You know, a lot of $40 knives, you're going to be still looking at the Chinese alphabet steels and 440C and things like that. So to see 14C28N, which is about my favorite budget steel, and really almost is even one of my favorite middle of the road steels, you know, I'm really glad to see that steel in this knife. So that seems to be a thing with RealSteel. They just tend to, you know, just ratchet up the quality and the materials a little bit compared to a lot of knives at a similar price point. And when it comes to price point, I think this one's going to be around 50 bucks, which it's worth every penny. The action on this and the fit and finish on it is very good, okay? And I could certainly justify spending even more than 50 on the knife. So that's my introduction. Let's go ahead now and get into some of the details on this knife, beginning with the size. So overall, the knife is 8 3/4 inches, so pretty nice size. Nearly 4 inches of blade there, so it's actually 3 7/8, and really even a little more than that. It's not quite 15/16, but it's almost 15/16. The handle on this is 4 7/8, and the weight is 4.5 ounces. Now, one thing that should be pointed out is this knife is a little thick in the handle. It's actually over 1/2 inch thick, so it's, well, and just over, so it's like, you know, 9/16 thick. So those are the specs. And in terms of carry, notice also this is a pretty thin knife when closed. So I gotta say, this knife carries really well. And if you're looking for a good daily carry knife that just does the job that you need it to do and is not intrusive in your pocket, this is a great option. Super comfortable and easy and manageable to carry around with you day in and day out. All right, now let's move on to the blade. The blade on this knife is, as we said, 14C28N. It is a full flat ground satin finished drop point. The blade stock is just under 1/8 of an inch, and it's pretty thinly ground stock. So notice, if you kind of watch how this knife plays out, at the tip here, it is fairly, come on camera, there we go. It is fairly thin. So this is not a knife you're going to want to drop when it's opened. There's a good chance that you could break that tip off. It would be a lot like, you know, I would treat this knife like I was carrying my Para 2 or my military, where it's a long, thin blade that can break that tip off, where you could break that tip off pretty easily. Otherwise, though, it is a very good knife. Just like many full flat ground, you know, thin blades like this, Lots of people will talk about just the utility of them, the fact that they slice well. They do all kinds of EDC cutting tasks just exceptionally. Not only that, because of that thin tip and that length, you know, in a defensive situation, this is an extremely potent blade. Hopefully, of course, we never have to use it, but you know, just a versatile blade shape. You could use this for preparing food in the kitchen. You could use it for cutting cardboard, skinning an animal, although, you know, the guts would probably get in the pivot, which would suck. But just really versatile. Lots of use for this blade, and I've really enjoyed it. By the way, I have done some cutting with it, and it's held up really well, which is what I expect from 14C28N. It's a great steel. All right, so that's my take on the blade. And next we want to move to another really cool section of the knife, and that is lockup and deployment. You can see there that it's a liner lock. Notice there's no relief cut in this liner lock, which I definitely appreciate. The liner is thick enough, okay, I don't have any issue with that, and that's a good thing. One of the RealSteels, the H9, the really big one, the liner was even thinner than this, and it kind of put me off a little bit. It wasn't, you know, a deal breaker or anything, but I like a liner that's a little bit thicker, and this one is nice and thick, which I do appreciate. Now, one thing I will say is it has this lock so that you can, and essentially, you know, it stops the liner from being able to be disengaged there. I have literally never used it, and it doesn't get in the way, and it's not obtrusive. So because of all that, I don't really, you know, I don't have an issue with it. It's not like, let's say, the lock system on CRKTs where they can sometimes get in the way of using the knife. Now, that's the kind of lock, and it is a bearing pivot. This is, I'm gonna say, this is the nicest bearing pivot that I have ever seen. Okay, I've literally, you know, I've handled tons of budget knives, and you know, the ones on the RealSteels, there is one other one that's comparable, and I'll bring it in right now just because it's also a RealSteel. The reality, the action on this knife and this knife are superb. Okay, this is the kind of action I would expect to feel on a $300, $400, $500 knife, and it's on like a $50 knife. So the action on this is outstanding. Now, could it be that that's only my example? I suppose that's possible, but I kind of doubt it. All right, so that's the action, lockup and deployment. Let's now finally move on to the handle. And I went with the orange G10 because I just like things that are kind of bright and stand out. By the way, I will say the G10 version of this is a great knife, but I'm going to opt to keep the titanium one. So you may see this knife in a for sale video in the not too distant future. Now, let's look at construction first. Now that I kind of got that little heads up out of the way, it is a stainless steel liner lock, very nicely milled out to save weight. And so you guys already know it's only 4.5 ounces. Pivot construction, which is nice. The one thing that's weird is this little lanyard post. It's quite, the hole in it is quite small. So, you know, really the only thing you could ever fit through there is maybe bank line. Or possibly, but it would be a fight, you could maybe wrap paracord through, see, you could wrap it like through here and around rather than actually through the little hole in the center. For me, I don't use a lanyard on my knives, so it's really neither here nor there, but I could see that being a bit of a challenge for some people. The G10 is only moderately grippy, maybe not even quite as grippy as your typical Spyderco. Not that, now it's not an issue, you know, I've used this knife a fair bit and never thought that it needed to be grippier, but it's, you know, it's just fairly moderate is how I would call the grippiness there. Single position pocket clip, and this little weird design is something that RealSteel's kind of doing on some of their knives. It's on this one, it's on the come on, I can't think of the name of the other, oh, the Griffin, sorry. And it's on the full-size Megalodon, or I mean, it's on the titanium Megalodon as well. Definitely very functional. It is milled, the handle is milled, and then a single screw so that it's only single position. Okay, so you can't move this to, you know, left side carry or anything like that. Otherwise, very ergonomic, nice and comfortable. The only thing that I'll be honest, I didn't really worry about find this a problem in use where like I do with some knives. But notice that here's the front finger, and you're good, half an inch, maybe even 3/4 of an inch from the base of the blade. I don't always like that, but in this case, I didn't really find it to be a problem. So again, I can't really complain too much about that. Some knives like that, they end up kind of feeling awkward in use, but not so with this one. All right, so let me get now to some comparisons, and there are a number of comparisons, a G10 liner lock that's sort of long and thin. I think one obvious comparison would be the Cold Steel Broken Skull. It is even a little bit longer, maybe. Similar blade design, with the full flat grind. Now the Broken Skull is thinner and lighter, and of course it has the lock back. The triad lock, which is going to be a little bit stronger, but it doesn't have that same, I will say, I think this is a very attractive knife, and this one, not so much. However, if it's just the kind of features you're looking for, this would be a great sort of competitive option, although it does cost a little bit more. Two other knives are going to cost a little more. Next up is the Stedman. This is the Zone Knife Company D01, designed by Stedman, so they say. And again, this I think is a very close option. Now the steel, I like for 14C28N better than 440C. However, I kind of like the ergonomics on this with the ability to choke up and use that nice front choil. Okay, this is a considerably heavier knife though as well. So this one actually carries in pocket a little nicer. Let's throw in one more Cold Steel. The American Lawman, again, for the size. It's kind of small, it's light, it's G10, and in fact the G10 texture on this and on this are somewhat similar. Now the RealSteel here is quite a bit longer. Let's pull in a couple of other RealSteel knives. If you're interested in this one, maybe the Puko, the G3 Puko would be of interest to you. It is a little smaller and heavier. So, if I was going to pick between these as a knife I was going to carry all the time every day, although I like the look of this one better, I find this to be a really, really attractive knife and really well made. The Megalodon is probably a little more practical. All right, now when it comes to practical RealSteel knives, I'm going to pull in these two. This is the H6 Special Edition. This is the H6 Elegance. And both of these are a little cheaper on price, and both very nice, very useful knives that are just very practical EDC blades. So can't really say that I recommend any above. I will say the features on the Megalodon are much nicer. The action on this is just superb. The blade shape on this I actually like just a little better than either one of these two because of the extra cutting edge. And of course, it does cost a little more. One last knife that is, when you've got a full flat ground, sort of budget-friendly knife, it's hard not to bring in the Rat 1 from Ontario. So this, of course, is the D2 version. We've said this over and over again, I feel like, but there it is. Finally, let's grab the titanium, and then we'll be done. So there is finally the titanium Megalodon that the design is based on. So there you go, guys. Overall, I think this is a great knife, fairly budget friendly, a lot of nice features, and a very high degree of quality and fit and finish. In fact, that I would even expect on a much more expensive knife. Hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll talk to you soon.